In the year 1640, King Charles I of England did something that would change the history of money. Though that was not his intention. Charles needed money to finance his wars. And he knew exactly where to find it. In the Tower of London there was a vault where the city's merchants stored their gold. It was the safest place in England. Or so they thought. Charles confiscated £200,000 in private gold from the tower. Without warning. Without permission. Without compensation. The merchants were stunned. The place they had believed was the safest in the realm had just robbed them. Now what? Where do you store your gold if you cannot trust the king? They found the answer in the workshops of the goldsmiths. And that answer, born of a royal betrayal, would eventually invent something we all carry in our pockets today. In the last episode we discovered the three functions of money: unit of account, medium of exchange, and store of value. Three jobs money must perform for an economy to function. For thousands of years, objects with intrinsic value did those three jobs. Gold coins, silver coins, bronze coins. Money had weight. It shone. You could bite it to check its purity. Today we are going to see how humanity made a leap that seemed impossible, going from metal coins to pieces of paper. And how that leap began, of all possible ways, with a theft. After Charles I's confiscation, London merchants needed a safe place for their gold. And the goldsmiths had exactly what was needed: vaults, locks, and no connection to the crown. The goldsmiths began accepting gold deposits. In return, they issued a receipt. A simple piece of paper that said something like, "The bearer of this document is entitled to withdraw £10 of gold from the workshop of John Smith, goldsmith." At first, merchants went back to the workshop to collect their gold every time they needed to make a payment. But soon something curious happened. Why go to the workshop, take out the gold, carry it to the seller, and have the seller carry it back to the workshop? It was much easier to hand over the receipt directly. And so, without anyone planning it, the receipts began circulating as money. The seller accepted the receipt because he knew he could go to the workshop and withdraw the gold at any time. The next seller accepted it for the same reason. And the next. The receipts passed from hand to hand, and the gold stayed put in the vault. By the 1660s, the goldsmiths took the next step. They began issuing receipts to the bearer. They no longer said John Smith is entitled to withdraw. They said the bearer of this document is entitled to withdraw. Anyone holding it could redeem it. They were, in everything but name, the first modern banknotes. Think about it. The gold stayed in the vault. But the paper circulated freely as if it were gold. People trusted that, if they ever needed to, they could go to the goldsmith and exchange paper for metal. That "if they ever needed to" is the key to this entire story. Before we continue with London, an important aside. Because the Europeans did not invent paper money. They were 600 years late. In China, during the Song dynasty, around the 10th century, merchants in Sichuan began using deposit certificates called jiaozi. The system was similar to the London goldsmiths. You left your iron or copper coins and received a paper that represented them. By the 11th century, the Song government had taken control of issuance. Paper money became official. Marco Polo, when he visited China in the 13th century, was astonished. In his book, he describes how the Great Khan paid with paper and how the entire empire accepted it. Europe would not have anything similar until much later. In 1661, the Stockholmsbanken in Sweden, run by Johan Palmstruch, became the first European bank to issue banknotes. But the idea was already centuries old in Asia. This matters because it demonstrates something fundamental. The transition from metal to paper was not a European accident. It was a solution that different civilizations found independently to the same problem. Metal coins are heavy, inconvenient, and dangerous to transport. What the London goldsmiths, the Chinese merchants, and the Stockholmsbanken had created has a technical name: representative money. It is a simple but powerful idea. The paper has no value in itself. It is valuable because it represents something that does. In this case, gold or silver stored somewhere. The note is a certificate, a written promise: bring this paper and I will give you metal. Representative money was a huge advance over metallic coins. It was lighter, easier to transport. You could carry a fortune in your pocket. And dividing it was trivial, just issue notes of different denominations. But it had one absolute requirement. The note only works if the promise is credible. If you go to the goldsmith with your receipt and he says, "Sorry, I have no gold left," that paper is worth nothing. And all the other papers he issued are also worthless. The credibility of the promise is everything. And this is where the story gets interesting. Imagine you are a goldsmith in 1670s London. You have £100 of gold in your vault. You have issued receipts for £100. Everything adds up. But you notice something. Most people never come to withdraw their gold. The receipts circulate happily from hand to hand. On any given day, only a small percentage of depositors show up to claim their metal. So you think, what if I issue receipts for £120? After all, nobody is going to come asking for all 100 at once. The 20 extra receipts I can lend out and charge interest. I make money from nothing. This, in essence, is what the goldsmiths began doing. And it is the embryo of what would later be called fractional reserve banking. We will return to this in the third season. But the seed was planted here. The problem is obvious. If everyone comes to withdraw their gold at the same time, there is not enough. The goldsmith has promised more than he has. If people find out, panic spreads. Everyone rushes to the workshop at once. And the goldsmith goes bankrupt. This is not hypothetical. It happened many times. But the most spectacular case of broken promises on a grand scale was not from goldsmiths. It was from an entire government. France, 1789. The Revolution. The new revolutionary government had a massive problem: it was bankrupt. But it had a valuable asset. It had just confiscated all the lands of the Catholic Church, which at the time owned an enormous portion of French territory. The solution seemed brilliant. They issued a new paper currency called assignats, backed by those confiscated lands. The idea was that assignats would be used to buy the lands at public auctions, and once used, they would be destroyed. It was representative money. The paper represented land. At first it worked. The assignats circulated, the auctions were held, the economy moved. But the government needed more money. Always more. Wars. Debts. Public spending. And the temptation was irresistible. Instead of destroying the used assignats as they had promised, they printed more. And more. And more. What happened was predictable. If there are more papers than land, each paper is worth less. Prices started rising. They rose more. And between May and December of 1795, prices were climbing more than 50% per month. It was hyperinflation. The first great paper money hyperinflation in modern history. By 1796, the assignats were worth practically nothing. The government withdrew them. The people who had trusted them were left with nothing. The lesson was brutal and clear. Representative money works as long as the promise is kept. The moment the issuer prints more paper than it can back, trust crumbles. And once trust is lost, recovering it is nearly impossible. On the other side of the Atlantic, 66 years later, another government reached a similar conclusion, though with a less catastrophic outcome. In 1862, the United States was in the middle of the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln needed money to fund the Union Army. There was not enough gold. Taxes were insufficient. Loans were not enough. The solution: issue paper money with no direct backing in gold. They were called greenbacks for the green color on the reverse. They were federal government notes, declared legal tender, but not redeemable for gold. The greenbacks lost value against gold. At their worst, a greenback was worth less than 40 cents in gold. But they did not collapse like the assignats. Why? Because the Union was winning the war. Because the government did not print uncontrolled amounts. And because there was a reasonable expectation that, once the war ended, the government would restore convertibility. And so it did. After the war, the United States gradually reduced the number of greenbacks in circulation. By 1879, gold convertibility was restored. The greenbacks are an interesting case because they show that representative money has nuances. It is not black or white. Not fully backed or completely worthless. There is a spectrum. And on that spectrum, what matters is not just how much backing there is, but how much trust people have that the issuer will keep its promise. We have talked about goldsmiths, French revolutionaries, and American presidents. But at bottom, this entire story is about something that affects us all: the promise. Representative money is, at its core, a written promise. This paper is worth something real. Trust me. When that promise is kept, the result is a civilizational advance. Trade accelerates. The economy grows. People can carry a fortune in their pocket without fear of robbery. When that promise is broken, the ones who pay the price are always the same: ordinary people. The wealthy have ways to protect themselves. They buy land, gold, properties abroad. But the normal family, the one keeping their savings in banknotes under the mattress or in a bank account, that family is left with papers that are worth nothing. In the France of 1796, thousands of families lost everything they had. Not because they were reckless. Because they trusted a promise the government did not keep. That dynamic has not changed in 230 years. And it is one of the reasons why monetary policy, who issues money, how much they issue, and with what backing, is not a technical matter that concerns only bankers. It is a matter that affects every family, every savings account, every future. 4 ideas to take away from this episode. First, representative money was a revolutionary leap. Instead of carrying metal, humanity learned to use paper that represented that metal. The London goldsmiths of the 17th century created the first modern banknotes, though China had done it 600 years earlier. Second, the system works as long as the promise of backing is credible. The paper is worth something because you can exchange it for gold. If you cannot, it is just paper. Third, the temptation to print more paper than there is backing is enormous. The French assignats are the clearest warning. Broken promises lead to hyperinflation and system collapse. Fourth, when money fails, those who suffer most are ordinary families. Monetary policy is not a technical matter. It is a social matter of the first order. Representative money was an enormous advance. But it depended on something fragile. A word we have repeated over and over today. Promise. Trust. Faith. The goldsmiths had it. The French revolutionaries lost it. Lincoln held on to it by the skin of his teeth. But where does that trust come from exactly? How is it built? And what happens to an entire country when it evaporates overnight? In the next episode, we are going to talk about the most important ingredient in every monetary system. The ingredient you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot measure, but without which no money works. Trust.